Welcome to the tutorial for Grease Pencil Sketch or GPS. So today I'm really excited to release because it's going to change the way you can work with Grease Pencil and bridge the gap between Grease Pencil and mesh workflow by automatically transforming your Grease Pencil into geometry and keeping your brush, keeping your colors, and being able to just transform them into a mesh. Either your strokes, your fill, you'll be able to sketch, you'll be able to create blocking very fast, and I will walk you through the whole tool and what you can do with it and how it works. So first step, we are gonna install the add-on. I will show you how to do it. GPSketch, just like a regular add-on. You go in the preference, add-on, install from disk, and then once you choose the zip file that you downloaded, you will have the GPSketch add-on present in your list. Then the second step is to install the library. You just need to click on install the GPSketch library. You can choose wherever you want to install it. For example, me, I have it here. You click install library, and then it will automatically be referenced into your asset libraries. If you want to do this manually, you just need to go in the file path where you installed the add-on, and in there you will see a zip file called GPSketch lib, and that's the zip file with the library inside. So you can unzip the folder wherever you like, and it's basically doing the same as clicking this. It's just a shortcut. With GPSketch, I will give you also the Qp tools, which is another add-on that you can install. It's optional, but I highly recommend it because it's fixing one problem working between Grease Pencil and mesh objects, which is that the materials are completely separated workflows. So you cannot add normal materials to a Grease Pencil object and vice versa. Qp tools is composed of multiple modules that you can unselect if you want. You can reactivate them. You don't need to use all of them. The one we are particularly interested in for GPS is the material list, this one, which is this. So what it's doing is just listing all of the materials that you have in your scene, and by clicking on one, it will open a shader editor, and it will allow you to just tweak your materials as you want in there, and then just remove it, and then you're done. The advantage is that you don't need to open a side menu, and you don't need to select an empty object that holds those materials to be able to edit them, which you would need to if you were using Grease Pencil objects and adding an object material to them. For those who use Grease Pencil already, they know what I'm talking about, and then it's very annoying, especially if you use it with geometry nodes in certain workflow. So now let's start with the actual tools. In your asset library, that's how all of the toolset is showing. In the GPSketch, you have the different objects that you can use. I'm gonna drag and drop this one into my scene for now. That's one way to import GPSketch into your scene. Another way would be to create a Grease Pencil object, for example, a blank one, and then add the modifier GPSketch. And then you can go in draw mode and then draw a stroke. Another way with the Qp tools would be in the tool asset pie menu to activate GPSketch and toggle on the tools that you want. And then once you set up the shortcut, you can just bring it into your scene like that, and it will pop where your cursor is. So that's a fast way to do it because you don't need an asset browser and you don't need to go into the modifiers to add to your current objects. Hello, this is Future Me. I come up with some good news, and now there's a new way to import and make a Grease Pencil sketch running and have it set up. So if I create just a normal Grease Pencil stroke, now when you go in drawing mode, you have a bunch of buttons here that you can hide if you don't want to see them. You can choose if you want them on the side or if you want them appearing at the bottom. I like it on the side, it looks a bit more like a painting program. And it's next to the tools. They do a bunch of things: the placement of the strokes, showing the grid, auto-locking. You can see what they do by just hovering over it. The one that we are interested in right now is this one, that will automatically set up everything you need for GPSketch to run, and then you just need to start drawing. Future Me logging off. So we will go through the modifier, how it works, and I will show you how the system under the hood is handling materials and conversion, so you don't have to do anything. And you can use any of your materials, brushes. It's very flexible to any type of workflow. So when you go in draw mode, I suggest to just delete this stroke. When you can set up the default eraser, I like to use eraser stroke, so it deletes the whole stroke, but you can use any eraser that you like. Then in the bottom part, you can see the different brushes that you have. And when you installed the library, all of these brushes were installed with it. And Blender will automatically recognize them as brushes and list them in the asset shelf. They are organized by type. So the one with D is for dot, which is a type of material. You can see the stroke. You can have line or dot or square. And D is for dots, basically. You have L, which is for line. The difference, how Blender builds the objects and the materials. Line is gonna extrude a shape, and dot is going to put on an instance of your stroke or of your brush on each point of the curve that you're drawing. And F is for the fields. But it's all very flexible. With GPSketch, you can use with any mode. It's going to give you different results, and it's just up to you to see whatever you prefer. So as soon as you start drawing and you enter draw mode, the GPSketch script is going to add this modifier at the bottom. This is what handles the conversion of the materials that you use from the brushes automatically into object materials, like that. So you can see here are the grease pencil materials and here are the object materials. That's why this script is very handy. So you don't need to assign anything or deal with conversion of your materials. It's all made for you. And that's allowing you to use any brushes that you create with this workflow. So now I am in line mode. And if I go into point mode, you can see it's way denser. And if I go in the solid view, you can see all of these cubes because we're in point and cube mode. You can do round, which is an octagon, and plane, which is just a plane. Drawn facing your camera. So always facing the camera. We don't need to have the face orientation here. And depending on what you want to do or your needs, you can always rotate it. So if you put it at 90 degrees, for example, when you draw, it will always be parallel to your camera. The scale options are doing what they are suggesting, basically scaling. In plane mode and line mode, some of the axes won't be accessible, mainly because you don't have all of the axes available, of course. But I just made sure that however you modify this, if you switch between modes, it will look the same and be deformed the same way. So you can always change from one to the other depending on the result that you want. And go back in preview mode. The brushes are by default using the vertex color. So you are drawing with the vertex color that you're choosing here, or by doing right click. Something that this workflow allows that is not possible or not available in grease pencil is, as you can see here, blending of colors between strokes. Because the way I am sampling the colors, it allows to have really nice blending between different brush strokes, if they are close enough. You can use a custom object as a profile, and it can be anything. I could bring on Suzanne, scale her a bit down, once the object, and go in mode. And it will be on Suzanne, and following the UVs of the object you are referencing. So you can create an object that is tailored for one type of purpose. And then if you see down, you have some randomization options. The only thing is be careful of how dense, because this is how many times it is instanced. But now with some randomization, you can really create a random and painterly effect. You can scale it and have something really cool. Here you have the options for the shading control that are per object, which is really cool because the options for coloring, the tint, is still lacking the color jitter and color randomness that you can have in your brushes, and that is built in some of the ones I provide. So when you are doing some tinting, you're removing and losing all of that color randomness. So that's why here you can control per object the hue, the saturation, and the value to give you really the control that you want. You can activate or deactivate the brush opacity, which is when you're drawing, and based on your brush and the setting of your brush, the opacity of the brush. If I draw with heavy opacity and then low opacity, you can see the result. And then if I deactivate, you can see that everything is full opacity or not. The Fresnel mask is going to mask the faces that are a bit hidden or facing away from your camera, which helps blend a bit on some of the border and give a nice effect, but it's really depending on what you would prefer. And also what it allows to do to have these values separated is that per object, you can decide if you want to cast shadows or not. You can see that this one is casting and the other one is not. The materials that I am making and converting also works with cycles. The only thing is that you need to crank up the transparency for it to go through all of the layers and all of the meshes that are overlapping each other. So maybe for this, if you want to be more friendly on your GPU, you can use the plane mode instead. Because raising the number of transparency is going to make cycles want to cry a bit. But that aside, the shaders should look very similar between Eevee and cycles, which is one advantage, but way easier and faster to handle with Eevee, of course. Here you have, as I've just showed quickly, the random rotations. You have random position also if you want to have a sort of airbrush effect. So if I go back in draw, and if I go in edit mode, select everything and delete, I can choose another brush and start painting with the random position. Otherwise it looks like that. You can choose only one axis. And if you want to change the random for all of them, like any other setting, you can click and drag down to select the 3 and then drag on the right or left to change them all at once. Here, if you look at the layers, you can see that by default there's 3 layers. Because if you are using the fill layer, instead of drawing strokes, you are going to draw a shape. Let me use the fill. When not in plane mode, the fill is going to take into account the size of the brush to determine the depth of your shape. And you can see how nice it is to have the random colors like that. And when the shapes are close from each other and points are similar, they will also blend between each other. Or you can also activate the stroke placement on surface, and then you will start drawing on the surface and start stacking them on top of each other. The fill mode has a special option here where you can chip edges. Basically, it's going to give some randomness on the edges of the objects. It's easier to see in solid view, but here you can see how it's destroying the edges. And the goal of this is to give a bit more organic look to what you're sculpting like this. And you can control it on the intensity, the size. Sometimes that might break, you can see over here. So be careful on the sizes and the settings you're using. But because you can override your materials, you don't need to use one of the brushes here as a material. You can create any material, which is, let's say, a brick. And I will just add a regular brick texture for the purpose of the example. And if I select the brick in the override material, you are going to use this one instead of the brushes material that you were using. And now you can start drawing your brick, which can be anything. So you can create blockings of anything, like a facade, for example. But you can see it can be messy if you want something very precise. You would need a particular type of mapping, for example, a triplanar mapping that doesn't take into account the geometry or the objects like this. You don't have any problem. And if, let's say, you want to use the vertex color that you've been using, you can go in the shader nodes here and use the GPS color, or you can call it from here, GPS color. And here you have the vertex color and the opacity with which you've been drawing. So here you can see that now your brick texture is using the color and all of the color variation you've been inputting, like that. And we could create even more variation. Then you can just get creative and have fun with it. If in the second one, I multiply by a color, I can have different variations. So now if I continue drawing, I can have all of my different brick walls in different colors, which is really fun. And if you want to go back into drawing lines, you select the line layer, and then you're going to draw lines again. One thing to be aware about when you see that this is happening, that there are gaps, it's because some of the strokes have a post-processing and a simplify. Basically, all of the strokes are curves that end up having points on them. If I go in edit mode and I put the stroke mode here, the point mode, and activate this, you can see all of the points that were generated. This is kind of optimized because the post-processing was on. But if you use all of the brushes that have a D on them, you will have a way denser object because this doesn't have post-processing. So now if I go in edit mode, you can see all of these were the points that were created. So it can be very dense. There is an option for spacing here. So depending on your speed, it will create less dense points, because speed is influencing a lot the speed at which the points are created. So you can control the density thanks to this value spacing. And now you can draw details or parts of your brick wall like that with just strokes. And in this example, because the mapping is according to the world, it will always match your texture. So if I remove the material override, we are coming back to the material you've been using for your strokes. If by mistake you delete this modifier, which handles the conversion of the materials, no worries. When you go back into draw mode and draw a stroke, it will come back. Let's delete all of this. I will just show you some of the brushes now. So the first ones, they are a bit more like sketch brushes and they are by default in black. I wish that in the future we can have a unified color for all of the painting, so it's not depending on what's in the brush asset, but that you can lock it to something you choose so it doesn't revert every time to the one that was last used for that one brush. Those one are more like sketching. This one has some jitter and is using some color. This is another sketch one. And they have opacity, pressure, and width. This one is an inking brush. We use plane so Blender is faster. This one is to draw leaves. Let's remove the Fresnel and remove the cast shadow for now. And later in this tutorial I will show you how to create your own brushes and save them. This one is a random shapes, abstract shape language to create visual noise and create dots. And some of them work really well when you start adding some random position that you can also do from here. You can add some jitter directly into the stroke. So instead of creating a line, you can see it's like spraying a bit more. This one creates a spray of points. This one is the eraser stroke. I just copied it from the basic ones and to have it here if you want to. I forgot these two. This one I really like also. I use it all the times in my paintings, so I'm happy to have it here now. So those are the fill and those are the line ones. I will create a new GPSketch object, go in draw mode, delete this one, and leave this one in line mode for now, and just start drawing with these. So the line ones are a bit lighter, because they don't need to instance objects as light as they are. This one is cool, it has some randomness, it's really cool to ink and sketch cool dynamic shapes. And this one is just a basic pencil. And these two are nice rakes, let's use planes. So there is a bug in the way Grease Pencil is drawing sometimes. You can see at the ends it's creating these, because I don't know if it's my Wacom tablet that's doing this. Sometimes it's recording going back, so maybe I really need to be following up on the movement. So if this happens and you like your stroke, you want to fix this, you can go in sculpt mode, and with any of them the brush is selected, you can press shift and it's gonna smooth your curve and then fix this. And then the last one, just to finish, is a thinner rake. Just to show you quickly the way the materials are converted and they look like. If I click on any of them, that's the material that you have. So here is the texture that we were using in the material here. So this bristle, if I go to the bristle one, so you can see it's the same asset. And here you have the shader that's handling everything for you. And if I locate, maybe I will use one, the splotches, this one of this. So what you can do per object here, the hue saturation changes, you can also do it per material. So every single object and strokes that are using this material are gonna inherit these changes. So those are two ways for you to change the hue, saturation and value. It's just giving you control. But basically I think the one in the modifier is way more handy, because otherwise you need to duplicate the material if you need to, etc. But if you know that if for the scene that you're using you want to shift all of the colors for that one particular material, if you have a brush asset that's specific for a certain task, you can do it thanks to that. So I've been using mostly the brushes that I made, but you can use any of the ones that you create or that are pre-installed. For example here, you can start drawing with the ones and they will inherit the settings when they were created. So for example, these ones, they were mostly created to be drawn in the line mode. So if I go in line mode, you can see how they look like. And then you can see how the other ones changed and the way they look now. So you can really have different effects depending on what mode you are doing. You can see like how you can do a starry night sort of effect with this here, if you add a bit of random position, which is pretty cool. By default, if your Blender scene you haven't changed it, mine is like end of 10K, usually it's 1000 and 0.001. I'll go back to points in here. You can see that with these settings there is some black artifacts. It's because of overlapping meshes and edges that are a bit too close, so you see it disappears when you get close and then it's worse as you get further away. To change this, you can increase the clip start just by clicking once, and then in general it's good enough, and then you can increase it more and it will improve it better. But then if you increase it too much, it's gonna start making disappear the objects that are too close to the camera. So, but basically doing one helps, and then if really you want to make sure there's none of it, you can add a tiny bit of random position or a bit of random rotation in Z, and then you should remove all of it, the remaining ones. Now I will show you the capture color and what it is and how you can use it. So first we are going to create a tiny asset with GPSketch. This can create some leaves as a cube. Let's make it facing the ground, something simple like that. Or it could be a plane, and we can add a bit of random position in Z. So like this, they are all slightly different. And give them a random orientation to give it a bit of a volume and a grassy feeling, which is really nice. So now we have this plane, and what I want to do is paint a texture on it. So I'll open the shader here, create an image texture, whatever you want, give the resolution that you like. And so one of the requirements for the capture color is that you will have to choose one texture. So it cannot be a blend of different textures and a complex material, or you will need to bake it before you are able to use it. So here I have some brushes. Let's just paint something random with some different colors, something a bit obvious so you can clearly see the result. So now I have that. Another requirement is a density of polygons. And I might improve this by forcing a subdivision in the future in the modifier, but for now I'm keeping it more simple. And so you need to subdivide because we will be sampling the faces and the texture based on the faces. And once you have your texture in place, you select your GPSketch object or all of your brushstrokes or any object you're using. You can use the capture color. You need to select the object and then select the texture. And now you can see that it's matching the texture that's below it, blending it perfectly with what's below. And this is even more interesting when you start using it in combination with scattering tools. So if I remove the capture color from this object, I will bring some draw scatter, which is just a scattering tool I made. And so we need to make sure that the pivot point is at the right place, because you can see that here all of the assets are randomly placed. That works better. So if I reduce the distance to have a more dense object, put them on top, you can see here it doesn't match the color, just using the one from the asset, which is totally okay and is what you would expect. But now if I come and add the capture color, I can select my object and my texture, and now they are going to blend with the texture below, which is really great. And if I want them to be stacked on the plane. So you can see how the resolution of the mesh below or the topology is affecting a lot the way the capture happens. So I'll try to improve this in the future with more random way of capturing the color. So either you add more subdivision, which will be more precise in sequence, or you could just walk around it. You can blend between the actual color of the object and the one from the captured one. That's the capture color. It's very useful, because now I can always go back to my plane in my paint texture, and I can continue painting, and this will affect the texture of paint. You can see now when I'm painting with these colors, it's automatically matching. So you're not restricted by the procedural aspect of the scattering. You can scatter to have all of the randomness that you want in your foliage, in your nature, and then control the result with the painting that you're doing underneath. And the influence of the color of the object can give you another layer of control over this also. And activate the cast shadow or not, you can still change it into cubes if you want to completely change the look of it. Activate the Fresnel, and you can start to have a very fluffy effect. That's very pleasant. And the show stroke curves is nice to have a preview of what you're doing when you're editing, but it does slow down a lot. You can see now I hide it, and it's way faster. And this is because of the scattering I'm using, but any scattering that has a face projection, then you can just sculpt and have all of your nature asset that adapts at the same time. It's just so much fun. There's something happening with the color space. Putting it to non-color seems to fix the bug. So probably you're taking into account that I need to have a non-color setting in your image texture. One technique that's very useful that I learned recently is that because the color wheel is so small, it's very hard to be precise when you choose and change color. But when you click on the wheel, you can press Shift, and then the movements will be way slower. You can see my mouse moving and then the changes on the wheel. So it's way easier and works the same on the value. It's way easier to have more precise refinement, precise changes instead of way too strong, because we need to take into account that the lighting is going to go on top of the local value. So too drastic changes and contrast in the color are going to be multiplied by the lighting. So you need to be very careful when painting textures. But here you can see the really nice result that we can get easily. And then we can match the saturation and the value. Here, for example, to show you, if we add a curve after, it's not going to be taken into account in the capture. So it's good or bad, just need to be aware of it and work around it in your workflow. Another one of the tools that I really like is the screw. So you have two versions of the screw. You have a curve and a mesh one. So For people who don't know what a screw is, it's like the screw modifier. It takes an axis, here you can see that line, I hope you can see it. And it takes a profile, which is the curve that you can see here, and make a screw revolve around that axis. So I've always found complicated to know where is the axis you're walking around. So with this setup, you have this that is drawn by default. And you can change the axis you're drawing around, and then the line is going to adapt. So the way you can use this is go in edit mode, and then choose the draw tool, and basically just start drawing. This is a technique that Jama Jarabayev was using a lot and showcasing a few years ago to design some of his Star Wars buildings. And I really like this way of drawing, it's pretty fun, so now I can have it. And that line is always going to adapt, so it's always visible at the top and at the bottom. It will adapt to the size of the mesh you're drawing. And if you apply this, that line will disappear, so there's no problem. The difference between the curve and the mesh, and why I made both, is because with the mesh you can have access to individual vertices, and you can bevel them with Ctrl B and then V, and then if you scroll with your wheel, you can increase the amount of vertices. You can extrude, so you have larger control if you want more precise design. So be careful on the axis on which you're drawing also, because this will create twisting, which could be exactly what you want, but you just need to be aware about that. And you really can do anything you want. You don't need to just extrude, you can duplicate and you can overlay some of your shapes. If I go and create another brick material that I did earlier, still remembers actually, brick, and apply this on the UVs, and do the same for this one. So you can see that it is well wrapped, unwrapped, and it's depending on that twist also. And this type of unwrap is from the bottom to the top. That's the bottom of your texture and that's the top. You can also have per curve. So it means that now every curve will have the full texture on it. So it creates an even scale for all of them, but you have that option. You can change the angle if you don't want to have a 360. You can only have half, for example. And you can change the resolution. So here you can see, let's remove that. You can see the resolution. So if I put back to 360, you can have a triangle or a square. So you can change the axis, and then it will change the way it's calculated. Following it will rotate around that line, so you know what you're doing, because now you can see it, which sometimes can be a bit abstract. So you can see that you can really create crazy shapes pretty easily. And of course you can hide the helper, but I prefer to have it on. And the last tool is Loft. So the Loft, what's really cool about this is that it will take a shape or a brush stroke. These two are just a curve and a mesh. I have two options. It's just that it was simpler than Grease Pencil, that was not adding much in that case. So it takes two curves that are highlighted with those black outlines that you can also hide, and it will just create intermediary shape and bridge them together. So this is just a circle and it's mixing with the same circle. You can squish it, you can squash, you can do any transformation to your object as you want. But you're also not restricted to the same curve and the same number of points. For example, if I put my cursor here and I draw something like that. So no, you just need to orient it so it is correctly matching the previous order of points. So you can see you can bridge any type of point into any order and to any shape that you want. You have a few options. You don't need to fill the cap, and you don't need to make it cyclic. If cyclic is off, the fill cap is going to be inactive also. So for example, if I bring another one here, you can see, it's a good example that the asset browser, because by default it was append and reused data in the preferences, it brought the same shape but reset all of the settings in the geometry modifier. That's why I like using this. And then in that case I can bring the loft curve, and now I have this one that's reset as it was from the beginning. So if I delete all of these points, I remove the cyclic, I can have my first point here. So you can see how very quickly you can create shapes that are complicated and that would take very long time to produce normally. You can change the resolution, the smooth angle, and you can solidify it only if fill cap is off. You can choose the direction of the solidify. And here you can change the algorithm that will interpolate between the curves. So the Bezier, which allows you to have Bezier subdivision and control the amount of edges. Rom, that is one of my favorite in terms of look. You have NURB and Poly. So this is just different options that you have to control your shape. So curve is great to be able to have control like that over the shape of your object. But if you want to have a different type of control, you can bring the Loft mesh, and earlier, now you have the option to control the bevel. The only problem is that you don't really control always the way Blender arranges the indices of your objects. So you might have some twisting like we saw, so just be aware of that. And sometimes when you duplicate, because here I just have planes that I'm duplicating, when you duplicate one, if the shape is all twisted and doesn't seem to match at all, you can Control Z and do it again, and it will match the same order of indices again. But this one, for example, you can have in Poly, or you can go in ROM, and now you have control over the shape with your favorite modeling tools. And one last option is the ability to convert grease pencil object into mesh, which is not usually available in Blender. So it's a very easy task. You just have, when you have a grease pencil object selected, this will appear. You just click. You have the option to keep the original or not, and that's it. And the object should stay exactly the same, and now they are regular faces, regular vertices. And this also works for any tools that are part of GPSketch, like the Hull sketch, for example. You can click the same button and it will convert it into regular mesh. Now I want to talk a bit about how to create brushes and how to save them in the library. It's not so easy to understand, so I'll walk you through at least one way to do it. So I will bring a GPSketch object for now, just as a starting point. And I'm sure we can let's remove the modifier and assign this material for now here. So if I go in draw mode, you can see all of the assets that you have here in the tool shelf. You have them here, and you have them here as well. So a lot of redundance, but you have many options. Here you can tweak the brush settings, and in that tiny drop-down menu, that's also in Tool tab here, which is the same one as this one, you can duplicate the asset, revert to asset, edit the metadata, and other settings. These ones you can't because they are built in Blender, but if I take one of mine, here you can see you can change the metadata, edit the preview, that's the thumbnail that you will need to create, and save changes to asset. So it's basically, if I make a stroke, and even just changing the size of your brush is going to trigger a change. Here you can see unsaved changes. Changing the color as well is saved and built in the brush. So if I save now, after that, every time I open Blender or use that brush, it will have the size and the color that we just chose, plus the radius, plus the strength, if it's sensitive to the pressure or the radius here, and then the spacing, the smoothing, post-processing, randomization of the colors, of the radius, everything will be saved. So be careful when you do this. It's easy to fix, but it's also easy to just mess up. And what you can do, when you want to create a new brush, you can duplicate an existing asset. Then it will ask you to choose a name. You can call it new brush. It will ask you to know in which library you want to save it. So you can have them in your user library, that's the default one. You can save it in the GPSketch. It will be saved in the library you extracted when you installed GPSketch. You can create a library with brushes. That's usually where I have my sculpting or painting brushes. Let's go with this one for now. And there are catalogs. So the catalog is what is appearing here. So that's why here you have a category in GPSketch brushes, GPS brushes. So if I add another one here, for example, in the same one, now it will need to reload the libraries. And if you have a lot of assets, it's gonna take a while. So now the assets are loaded, and you can see at the end, I have my new brush, and it's ordered by alphabetical order. That's why I also added the prefix L or D or F, so they are kind of grouped by name. But you could also create a catalog for each category that you want, if you want to have a bit like Photoshop, categories of brushes that has particular purposes. And now every changes that we make to this brush, which can be the stamp, we can change the texture, we can change if it's a stroke or a fill one. So we can add a new material and call it new brush material. Here you need to unlock the material it was using and lock it again. So now it's going to use the new material that we created. So you can see here, it doesn't have any texture anymore because we don't have any here. And the strength is at half, so let's put it at 1. And that tiny logo shows that the pressure is on. So if I press very hard or not hard, it will have opacity. The strength indicates the max strength that you will have in that case. So 1, you will have max strength of 1. And the radius is the same. Radius, 0.18 meter is the max radius. You still need to be aware of the size of things because that plane is 2 meters by 2 meters, so I'm still drawing very big now, even if it's that scale. So you need to go small if you want to have small details. When you save presets, otherwise every time you're gonna draw, if you create a brush that's supposed to be a detail brush, and it always pops and be very, very big, it could be annoying, so make sure to set it to a correct scale when you save your brush. So here, the pin is for the mode, because you can either draw with the material or the vertex color. The material means that it's gonna draw with this color only. So it will always be the color that is set here, regardless of any other thing. So you can change at any point. But if you want to paint, I really prefer to have the vertex color. And you can pin this mode to make sure it's always on this one. So you're telling the brush every time you load, I want you to be using this mode. Here are the ends. So you can see the end here is a square, or you can have it more rounded. This applies when there is no GPSketch object or modifier on, because this is not taken in account by the modifier in the system. That's the only option that I cannot really reproduce. In advanced, you can change the spacing like we talked about earlier, which is mostly optimization. A bit like in Photoshop, actually, how fast you can draw, and the number of points. The smooth, angle factor, it's to have a slant, because the angle is 0. If I draw vertical, it's going to be thin, and if I draw horizontal, it's going to be thick. So that's how you can make a cool brush like that. So the next option is the hardness. It's basically how hard or soft is your stroke, so that's 100% hard, and that's completely soft. You can see that this could cause problems in certain cases. So if you have your depth order in 3D location, and sometimes 2D location, depending on the brush style, this could cause problems. But no, it looks like it's okay. And you also have this with GPSketch, so you also. But for it to work properly, it's better to work with the plane mode, because otherwise it's almost impossible to get the correct mapping. And in line mode, it makes it quite transparent, but I will see if I can try to fix this to keep a better opacity. You can see that it has a better look of soft brush than the normal grease pencil. So with the point mode, you can have a nice soft airbrush. If I deactivate GPSketch, that's how it looks like. So this works. Here, the stroke drop-down is very interesting. So you have first, let's disable the randomize, the post-processing. So you can smooth your curve, and then you can add iterations to it. So it's going to smooth it after your drawing. So it's not like a lazy mouse, because this with shift you can have. I don't know if you can see it, it's very small in that case. Increase the radius. Here you can see it. So even if the stabilized stroke is inactive, when you shift draw, it will activate it. But when you activate it, it will be always on. So that's good to know. That's why I really think it's better to have it off and then set the radius as you like to draw perfectly smooth shapes. So that's post-processing. You can subdivide your strokes if they are not subdivided enough, but in my experience, they're always really subdivided a bit too much. So the trim end strokes, what it does is when you have a stroke that's intersecting itself, it's gonna make a perfect shape like this. So this could be handy, depending on how you're drawing, because it doesn't take into account different strokes. But to cut this, you can use the trim. It's gonna, most of the time, do what you want it to do. And then there's the randomize, which are really cool. So that's what I'm using for some of these ones, to have some random color, random saturation, and position. So here you can see I have some random rotation to make sure it's always, it looks unique and not too repetitive. And some random hue and saturation. It's very small because if you start putting it too strong, it looks like a rainbow, which could be fine. This could be what you're expecting from your brush. But for my presets, I prefer to have them like this. The tiny icon means that it will make the randomization per curve, so per stroke. So every time I draw one, the whole stroke will have the same value, but the different ones will have a different value, which is really cool setting. And here is the pressure, so influence the randomness by the pressure. And the jitter. The jitter is, instead of having a straight line like this, it's gonna randomize the points if you see what they look like. It's basically just doing this. From your line, it's offsetting it up and down, which you can achieve also from this, but this affects the whole object, so just another layer of control. And then the stabilized stroke is just displaying the cursor, so you can see the size of your brush, which is really useful, and then the fill color. And when you're happy and you're done, you can just save the changes, but be careful which brush you're saving. So we were editing this one, so if I really crank things up. So if I like the way this brush behaves, I can just save it now, save changes. And now it will reload again the whole library. So if you have a big library, it takes a while. So the bonus, I wanted to talk about an extension called GP Wheel that you can find directly in Blender in the extension here. You can install it, and then you see all of the options that it has as a customization. So you can choose all of the tools that will show in the pie menu. Let me bring GPSketch. And then once you have a grease pencil object selected, you can press the shortcut that you define. And then this is the pie menu that will show. By default, it doesn't look like this. I just customized it to look like exactly like I want and have the tools that I want to have available. What's amazing about this add-on is how fast it speeds up the workflow, because it will change mode instantly between different tools. So if I click this one, I can just quickly just take the curve that is below the cursor and move it around. Once it's selected, I can scale, rotate, etc. And then with one click, I can go back to drawing. Library doesn't want to load. So here, and then you can continue drawing, and then I can use the lasso and then select the two of them or just this one. And I can come and choose the line. So using this make working with grease pencil so much faster, because you don't need to go around modes and then select the tool that you want to use, etc. In one click, you can just be with the tool that you want. So this is very, very cool. And here I activated some of the modes because I don't really need them, but I highly recommend this. It was recommended to me, and it's a very good one. On top of this, that pie menu looks amazing. But for example, if you take the square and you go in fill, now you can just draw shapes like that instantly. The only problem you need to be aware about is that the shortcuts, they don't work for the radius with these tools that are not the drawing one, which is a shame. So you need to change here if you want to have a different radius for the square, for example, a different depth. So this kind of sucks. You can still with F, I guess, but F is less precise. Or you can change it on the fly if you press F while you're still in edit mode of this one. That's cool. I take back what I was saying. So that's really nice. You can change it like that. And if you are in point mode and you draw, for example, a line or a bezier like that, I go back in line. Then the subdivision, you can change it with up and down by holding up and down button to match what you need. Or you cannot hold up, but you can hold going down, which is a shame. So you need to press a lot of times to go up, but to go down you can just hold the button, which is fun. Or maybe it's something I did with my shortcuts that is doing this. So this add-on, amazing. I have a prototype I will show you, but that will be for future updates of shortcuts and to save a lot of time between changing stroke placement, at least as a first. But this is not going to be released right now yet. So you can see these buttons, they change the stroke placement. So I'm trying to avoid to have to click anywhere outside of the viewport and kind of break the workflow. So I'm going to be implementing this eventually. That's it for the tutorial for GPSketch. I hope you like it. I hope it was clear. I hope you make really cool stuff with it. Don't hesitate to tag me, tag GPSketch, so I can see what you do with it. And if you want, you can join the Discord to discuss features, improvements. And I will add more features as I go and as I continue developing them. And in the meantime, happy blending.